that, of course, there's more music now in the world than at any other time in history. We are almost too much. We are constantly bombarded by music. You walk into a shopping mall, you walk into a restaurant, you walk into a clothes shop, you walk into a hairdresser and they have, I don't know about your hairdresser, but my hairdresser has MTV on all day, or whatever, and it's just, I wish they'd turn it off, you know. And it's just being bombarded by modern pop music or whatever it is. You get into a taxi and they're listening.
Yep.
And there's more music around us than at any other time in history. There's more music being made than at any other time in history because it's easier to make music. You could just buy a piece of software for your computer now and you can make pretty convincing electronic music, or you can record rock music, whatever it is. You can do that in a way that would have been unthinkable at any other previous era. So you'd think, well, that means there's more music, there must be more good music. Unfortunately, that seems to be, the opposite seems to be true. There is more music being made, but so much of it is very generic and has no distinctive personality of its own. So it just becomes background noise, which leads into, again, part of the problem, that if music doesn't grab people, then it's very easy to ignore.
Just please be as straightforward as you can and as you want. I mean, just think of the fact. Democracy is all over the place, arts included. Democracy in art, is it a matter of evolution from your point of view or a collapse?
It's a very complex question. I think there was a time when music was very much in the control, for example, of the record companies. And you could say, well, that's a bad thing. Why should the record companies be the arbiters of taste? Why should they tell us what we should be listening to, what's worth them signing and releasing? Now we have a situation where anybody can make their own record, they can release it on the internet, they can put it on Spotify. There's some ridiculous figure like 10,000 new songs are uploaded on Spotify every week. This is too much. But the other side of that coin is that there was a time when record companies were, in a sense, filtering the really great stuff, not from the bad, but from the average stuff. And we now have a situation where most music is very average, very banal, very bland. It's not bad, it's just like air, it's like nothing, you just can't even grab hold of it. There was a time when record companies would have filtered out the stars. And I do, in a way, I do have a kind of nostalgia for that time. Even though, as you said, the democratization of music means now anybody can make a record. But as we see, music has not got better. Arguably, it's got more. It's not as magical as it once was. But it's very complicated because who am I to tell all these other people they shouldn't be?
But how do you live with this type of reality?
Well, in a sense, I am one of those people because I didn't get, at the beginning of my career, I didn't do record deal. I started making music in my bedroom, originally releasing cassettes, selling them mail order. I then got to the point where I was pressing my own records up. So I am one of those people in a sense. But let's just say it was a lot harder. You had to really want it badly. Now it's very easy to make music and just release it online. But nobody really listens to it.
Do you ever think of you as a survivor, fighting for something which is not at fashion, which is not vital, which is not needed anymore?
Partly, yes. I mean, it's expensive because it's the only thing I can do. It's the only thing I'm very good at is making music. But sometimes I feel like I have... Sometimes I feel like I was born 10 years later than I should have been, or 20 years later than I should have been. If I could have been part of that incredible explosion of creative, conceptual rock music in the 70s, late 60s, early 70s, or could have been part of that incredible new wave of music in the 80s, with sampling and synthesizers and electronic music, and I love that stuff, and there's a magic about those eras. There's so much creativity, and I'm frustrated sometimes that I was born when I was born. I was born in a great year. I was born in 1967, the year of Sgt. Pepper, Jimi Hendrix's first album, Floyd's first album. I mean, it's a fantastic year. But by the time I was old enough to make music really professionally,
You even say that in a song. I was born in '67, the year of Sgt. Pepper.
that has been a frustration in a way, that I was making the kind of music that probably would have done really well 10 or 20 years earlier, but I had to fight to get any attention for it at all. And in a sense, I still feel that way. I've been doing it 30 years now. I feel like, in a sense, I came through at the very last point in history. It was possible to still come through using the old model.
On the other hand, you live a huge advantage. You are in yourself a huge advantage, because all the influences that are present in you are somehow mixed together, and you have your own personality. Less and less people would say Steven Wilson sounds like that. Steven Wilson is that. They will say Steven Wilson is Steven Wilson.
Right.
A huge advantage to, I don't know, to metabolize.
Yes. I think you're right. I begin to feel that. And in fact, only really in the last few years have I begun to feel like people actually pay me that courtesy of saying, Steven Wilson has created his own musical universe. Before that, it was always Steven Wilson plays prog rock or prog metal or space. And I was always frustrated by that, because I would always point to things, well, but I'm making electronic music, I'm singer-songwriter, ambient music, and and I was frustrated by that. And you know what? I always really aspired ultimately to be someone that created their own musical world, because they were the people that really influenced me the most are what I call the auteurs. The people, they weren't necessarily the greatest musicians, but they had this vision. Frank Zappa, Kate Bush, Neil Young, Peter Gabriel, Roger Waters. I could go on. Prince, in a way. I could go on. These people who, ultimately, if you try and explain to somebody what kind of music they make, you just come back to this thing, well, they just make Kate Bush music, or they just make Prince music, and in a way, that's the greatest compliment anyone could pay me. If I feel like I've actually attained that status, then that makes me very happy, because that's really what I want it to be. Because I think when you create your own musical universe, your music has some degree of immortality. Hopefully people will still be listening to it long after I'm gone.
Talking about Kate Bush, one of your dreams is to rearrange her musical catalog.
Remix her catalog into surround sound,
Remixing, you did a lot of this stuff.
I did, yeah.
What's the point of doing this, Steven?
The point is that most of these albums were only ever mixed in stereo before, and we now have this thing called 5.1 surround sound. So now, you could say, well, that's a very niche market, not many people have 5.1 surround, but actually they do, because a lot of people now have home cinema systems at home.
Right.
So they have the speakers at the back of the room, and they have the center speaker, which is where most of the dialogue comes from on a movie mixed in 5.1. So there's a whole market out there of people who have 5.1 surround sound systems. There is a certain kind of music, I'm not going to say all music, AC/DC wouldn't work in 5.1, for example, but there is a certain kind of music which sounds phenomenal when it's coming from all around you, not just stereo. Suddenly you have harmony vocals coming from behind you, acoustic guitars, keyboard parts flying around the room, or vocals, you know, that seem somehow to be enveloping you.
So you don't think that you alter somehow the authenticity of that type of music?
I try not to. I try to be very faithful, and I have a rule that is I only remix albums I genuinely know and love, because I believe that I bring the fans' perspective to those albums. So, for example, I've been offered certain records which I've turned down because I'm sorry, I'm sure that's a great album, but it's not something I'm personally
You're not from that
connected
world.
to.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's the right time.
Even very honest, do you ever feel being Ted Turner in black and white films doing this?
No, I don't. And I think the reaction from the fans speaks for itself. Most of the people, some people, you know, listen, there are always a few people that are they think it's some kind of sacrilege to do this, but it's been a very small minority. It's a very small minority. Most people who love those records love the fact that the records they know and love, like the back of their hand, suddenly they're hearing a new perspective. They're hearing things in the mix they've never heard before.
If I say progressive rock, you will surely say I don't necessarily use this formula. If I say pop music, some people might understand it in a pejorative way. Which is the formula that you would like?
Who's the most famous pop group of all time?
ABBA?
I would say the Beatles.
The Beatles, sorry. I agree,
Yeah.
the Beatles.
And, you know,
I agree.
everyone likes the Beatles. Almost everyone likes the Beatles. It's a pop group. You wouldn't really call the Beatles a rock group. I mean, you kind of can, but rock was something in a way that came later with
Yes.
bands like Led Zeppelin and The Who and stuff. The Beatles were unashamedly a pop group writing 2.5-minute pop songs. Popular, things they intended to reach a large mainstream audience.
People that love Beatles and admire Beatles, they will not be very happy to say that Beatles is pop, because they will get the feeling that this is a pejorative.
Because I think a lot of people now, when they hear pop, there's something in their brain that goes pop equals Justin Bieber, or pop equals
Right.
Lady, you know, and I understand that because every generation has its own pop music, and pop music for me right now is not something I would feel particularly connected to. But look, for example, I grew up I was a teenager in the 80s. Pop music for me was Depeche Mode, Tears for Fears,
Oh, yes.
Michael Jackson,
Oh, yes.
Prince, The Police. I love it. Kate Bush was pop music. Kate Bush is not rock music. I don't know what you call it. I mean, we've kind of been through this. It's Kate
Yeah.
Bush music.
Yeah.
But if it's going to be anything, it's pop. It's very experimental, very ambitious pop, but it's pop. Depeche Mode is very dark pop, but it's pop. Popular, pop music.
Yep.
And I think now it's almost become a subgenre in its own right. Pop music to a lot of people only means that kind of Americanized, mainstream MTV music. It's not. Pop is the Beatles, pop is ABBA, pop is Depeche Mode, pop is Michael Jackson, Prince. It's all pop. Pink Floyd is pop.
Well, I know lots of people who will not be very happy when hearing this.
Look at the back. If you get an original pressing of Meddle or Dark Side of the Moon, there's a thing on the back that says file under popular.
Oh, yes. Okay. Quotation from yourself. Accessible, but also sophisticated. End of quotation. You use these words about your music. Accessible, but also sophisticated. In order to be sophisticated, don't you need an audience being aware of a certain type of code in order to decode your music as, to call it, sophisticated?
I don't think the audience is as dumb as sometimes the music industry would have us believe. Now, let's go back again to some of the artists we talked about. The Led Zeppelins, the Kate Bushes, the Pink Floyds, the Peter Gabrels. All of these artists sold millions of records. Now, I think we can agree that their music is quite sophisticated, can be quite intellectual, it's quite cerebral in a way. There's definitely a very strong intellect at work in all of those bands, and yet they sold millions of records. Now, there's only two explanations for that. Either the people who bought those records aren't really appreciating all of this other stuff, they're just responding to the pretty melodies and that's all. Or, subconsciously, of course they are absorbing the message and they are absorbing all the sophistication, and they can appreciate that this thing has layers and levels to it. And I think there's a real art to being able to take something that has depth and layers to it to a mainstream audience. We see it happen in the world of cinema all the time. People can, I think the audience can respond very deeply, engage very deeply into things when they want to, or when the art kind of justifies it. And I think it's to appreciate. I mean, I have strong melodies, I hope I have good songwriting, and yet some of the subject matter of my songs is quite dark. People engage with it, I think they get a lot out of it.
Let's play for 1 minute a game. I am a fundamentalist, progressive rock fan of yours.
Okay.
And I meet you on the street. Can we play that?
Okay.
And I'll tell you something. Stephen, I'm very upset. First of all, you became soft, you became girlish. I suffer from this point of view. What's the matter with you? What will you answer?
Well, it depends how obnoxious I was feeling on the day. I mean, the answer, that person,
Okay.
that person, clearly the person with the problem in that particular scenario is you, not me, right?
Right.
Anyone who listens to music within a very narrow set of parameters and set of genre, I feel it's their loss. I understand there are people like that. I'm not one of them. And I don't think a lot of my audience are like that, but I know that there are some. I know that there are some. I kind of think to myself how boring it must be to just listen to, and I don't mean this just with progressive rock. I mean, there are people that only listen to death metal. I have a very good friend of mine, Michael Ackerfeld, in a band called Opeth, and they went from being a very extreme death metal band to being much more acoustic, and they didn't do the metal thing anymore. And Michael had death threats. He had death threats from people who said, you have turned your back on true death metal.
I can understand that, yeah, yeah.
To me, the only word that I can think of that describes that is pathetic. It's pathetic, and I don't mean that in a patronizing way. I know it sounds very patronizing, but I feel like sad for those people that they can only listen to music in this very narrow set of parameters. So musical snobbery can, of course, sometimes be a good thing. You know, it's good to have certain standards. It's good to have certain standards of quality about this is what I like and this is what I don't like. And that's fine. But don't tell me that it's my mistake and my problem that my new record doesn't fit into your narrow set of musical parameters. I'm sorry for you that it doesn't, but it's not me it's not me that has the problem. It's you. Or I mean, it's not even a problem. It's just the situation.
You got into the game. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Okay. How do you internalize? Which is your perspective on being true to yourself and satisfy the audience at the same time?
That's something I've asked myself many times over the years. I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to what is your definition of being an artist. You know, you asked me earlier what my definition of being successful was. Another question is, what is your definition of being an artist? Because one of the things the music industry tends to do is it lumps together two very different industries. It lumps together the music industry and the entertainment industry.
Right.
And the entertainment industry is things like American Idol and The Voice and reality and real pop mainstream that's all about what does the audience want? Let's manufacture it and give it to them. Let's entertain them. And the music industry, to me, is about people who have some kind of inner need to express themselves creatively. And they don't think about what people want. They have to do what they have to do. And we come back to those kind of artists we talked about.
Yep.
And finding an audience is almost incidental. That doesn't mean you can't try really hard to find an audience. And listen, I work really hard promoting my music.
I know that.
I'll talk as much as I can about it, and I'll do everything I can to promote it. But the one thing I won't do is allow the thought of what my audience want, or what my record company want, or what my management want, to influence the music when I'm making it. So the music is made in a vacuum, but once I finish making it, okay, how can I sell it? How am I going to sell this? What can we do? Where's the single? How can we get it on the radio? I'm happy to play those games as long as it doesn't impinge on the actual creative act. And that's the difference between the music industry and the entertainment industry.
Can you be vigilant on that? Really vigilant. I mean, can you be happy with yourself from this vigilant point of view?
Yeah, I can. I think I've stayed pretty close. I mean, listen, no one is completely innocent. I mean, there are times when I've contrived music, mostly early in my career, to be fair. Certainly not for the last 10 years or so, but there was a time early in my career when I contrived certain pieces of music to try and get on the radio or to try and get myself a foothold in the industry. But in the last 10 years or so, certainly in my solo career, I've been pretty self-indulgent in the best possible way.
What about you as a singer? I mean, To the Bone is a record where your voice is very present. Very more present as a singer. Am I wrong?
Absolutely. It's very much a vocal orientated album.
You also have alternative moments.
Yes,
I mean,
yeah.
it's not at all easy. How do you see yourself as a singer?
Well, you know, I mean,
You talk about over-singing and
I hate oversing. I hate the kind of American Idol, modern pop thing where the people oversing. They fill every single square inch of music with vocal gymnastics. I hate that so much. I like singers very much that I think are not necessarily great singers, but they have a completely unique sound. So, you're Neil Young. Neil Young is not a great singer. Bob Dylan is not a great singer. I don't think. Not great singers. But I love them. I love listening to them. I got over a long time ago, I got over the fact that Mother Nature didn't bless me with an amazing... I mean, I would love to have had a voice like Jeff Buckley or Marvin Gaye or even Tom York or someone like that. You know, I don't. I have a very limited potential with what I can do with my voice. And I have done everything I can to try and push myself to make the most of the limited gift that I have. Singing falsetto, learning how to use harmonies. One of the reasons I got so involved in harmonies in the early years is because I didn't have a very strong voice. So if I started to stack it up with harmonies, so I ended up listening to a lot of Brian Wilson and a lot of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Todd Rundgren and learning how those guys used harmony vocals. But actually the real motivation for it was because I didn't feel my voice on its own was strong. And it isn't. You know, and I'm not the greatest singer, and I'm never going to be Jeff Buckley or Marvin Gaye. I know that now. But again, I look at these artists that we've been talking about, and sometimes they were very limited too. It's all about the creativity, pushing yourself, how you use what gifts you've been given.
I gave up all the gambling. I gave up picking fights. I gave up saying sorry. I gave up being polite. Give it up, give it all up. Give it up, you are. Give it all.
Many of us used to perceive you as a rather depressed human being, a sad, austere, hieratic character, unable to smile in an authentic way, almost totally detached from this vulgar, material world. You seem to be quite a pleasant person. I mean, what happened in between?
Nothing. I've always been like this. I mean, here's the thing, okay. The reason, I think you're right, people have that perception of me. Of course, the one reason is the music tends to the melancholy. I've always been more interested in these sad, beautiful, melancholic, tragic stories. That's number one. Secondly, I have never been the kind of person who is particularly attracted to the idea of social media. Here's a picture of me in the supermarket. Here's a picture of me having my... I'm never interested in that. So the only images a lot of people have had of me over the years have been the official publicity photos. Now, here's the thing. Most rock musicians don't smile in publicity photos. I'm sorry, but it's true. You don't, when you're doing your publicity photos, you don't have a big cheesy grin. So most publicity photos are, you know, me looking like most, you know, most other rock and roll acts. They all kind of pose in photos. So I think because people haven't had the other side, the more kind of private side of me, they haven't really understood the kind of person I am. And when you connect that with the music, I think it's very easy to get this idea of me as this kind of suicidal, melancholic, manic, depressive. And actually the reality is the opposite. Because a lot of the time, the music for me is a kind of exorcism of that side. I mean, if you kind of acknowledge that every one of us has those two sides of us, for me, I exercise as a kind of cathartic experience to put that into the music. Somebody else might go to the gym or play squash or whatever it is, or, you know, work out. To me, I write these sad stories and I get that darkness out so I can be pretty happy generally. And I think you're right, but you're no exception. People are always kind of surprised when they meet me. But actually, it's changed slightly because I did start about a year ago. I started an Instagram feed, and I post a lot of pictures on that. And in almost all of them, I'm smiling and having a good time. So people, I think, are gradually beginning to see the other side of me. No pictures of me having breakfast or in the supermarket.
I will say the word sacred, and I will kindly ask you to give me 3 answers. I will say sacred book, and I would kindly ask you to tell me which is your sacred book, the most important book in your life, the sacred book.
I mean, when you say sacred, I mean,
Very important, that one that you take with you all over the
so
place.
my
Yes,
favorite book.
I say sacred just to make it strong.
It's a very strong word. The sacred almost implies you have some kind of, spiritual connection to the book, which in a way I suppose is true of anything that means a lot to you. You do have that. My sacred book is a book I was introduced to when I was studying English literature in my high school.
Yep.
And it's a book by James Joyce, and it's called Dubliners. It's a book of short stories, and what's so inspiring about that book to me is it's a book all about the idea of paralysis, not literal paralysis, also fear, the jump to whatever might be the unknown, the potential for something better, but also the potential for something worse. So, and that book really instilled in me that idea of spiritual, emotional, career, relationship paralysis. It's a series of short stories. I mean, it was written, over 100 years ago,
Yep.
but it's still so prescient to me.
It is a wonderful book.
Yeah.
Okay, which is your sacred film?
I have a few, depending on the day you ask me. I
Which
struggle.
is your sacred film today, in this very moment?
I think The Elephant Man, David Lynch's
David Lynch.
Elephant Man, is pure cinematic poetry. It has everything I love. It has poetry, it has heart, but it also has a sense of the surreal, and it has a sense of dream logic, and it's also, of course, based on something, a true story, which has so much pathos, so much beauty, so much melancholia. It's a classic. I mean, we were talking about my music. This is the ultimate example of sad, but somehow so uplifting.
I was thinking of the fact that The Elephant Man would have been a perfect match for Storm Corrosion. I mean, Storm Corrosion would have been a perfect
You mean the soundtrack? Yeah.
for The Elephant
Yeah,
Man.
it would have done. Yeah. I mean, I share with Michael, my collaborator on that record, we both share this love in both film, music, whatever it is, in this idea of the surreal, or this idea of dream logic. So things don't necessarily always follow a very linear, logical path. And that's what happens in our dreams. When we're dreaming, our dreams, the stories take bizarre turnings, don't they? It's the opposite of what Hollywood movies are like, mainstream Hollywood, where everything is very neat and all unfolds very neatly, one scene goes to the next. And there's a place for that, but when we dream, it's the opposite of Hollywood logic.
Different syntax.
Exactly. We go through bizarre juxtapositions of images, and I love that when it manifests itself through cinema, music. I'm always drawn to those kind of things.
Okay, and which is your sacred musical album?
This is easier for me, surprisingly. You'd think music would be the hardest one for me because I have so much music in my life and I've heard so many records. But there is one record which I always come back to time and time and time again. It's a very obscure, it's a reasonably obscure record. It's by a group called Tangerine Dream, and it's one of their earliest records. It's a record, it's called Zeit, and it was made in 1972, and for me, it's the original ambient record. Nothing happens. When I play it to other people, they're like, what? This is your favorite record? Because nothing happens. There's no melody, there's no harmony, there's no rhythm. It's pure, consonant. To me, the analogy with ambient music, if you try and explain to people why you like ambient music, why should you like music that has no melody or rhythm, it's the same reason you would enjoy perfume that fills a room with a particular scent. Ambient music is like filling a room with a perfume. It changes the way you relate to the room. It changes the way you relate to existence without being too pretentious about it. And Tangerine Dream Zeit is the original ambient record, and for me, still the greatest one. It's a record, when I first heard it, I didn't understand it at all. I thought it was absolute nonsense. I never wanted to hear it again. But something drew me back to it.
And you made the click.
And then just one day it clicked, and it has become the record I go back to more and more than any other record I own, yeah.
Stephen, there's a quotation from yourself. It says something like this, and I do have to confess, I was struck by that.
Okay.
Ask Me Nicely, the documentary about the making of your album To The Bone. You say something like this. If you want to start doing music now, real music, don't even think about a career. There's so much music in the world, it might ruin what's left in you. These are hard words.
It's a really hard lesson, you know, but people do ask me, young musicians ask me, what advice would you give to the music industry? And it's really hard because the music industry is completely overpopulated, just like the planet is overpopulated. There's too much of it is generic. The reason why it's generic is because people think too hard about what they need to do to become successful, not what their heart and soul tells them to be doing. So what I mean by that is you don't necessarily have to stop being ambitious. You don't necessarily have to stop having an idea that maybe I could have a career in the music industry. But the problem is, I don't know if you have this quotation, this expression in Romanian, but the tail wagging the dog.
We do have that.
Yeah, so the idea that you're thinking so hard about what you need to do to be successful that it starts creating the music for you. It's the tail wagging the dog. And that should never happen with music. It should never happen with art. So what I say to people is do the music because you love to do it. Don't think about if even a single person is going to enjoy it.
Yes, but they can answer, it's easy for you to tell that you've made it.
Yeah, I know, and that's the problem. But the problem also is that if they start thinking, it's a self-defeating argument. If they start thinking about what other people want, they end up sounding like everyone else. They've got even less chance. The best chance they've got, I believe, the best chance any musician has of making it in the music industry now is to sound like nothing else. Because there's too much of everything else.
Okay.
So actually, I'm doing them a favor in a way. I'm saying, do what you want to do. Don't try and sound like anything else. It may sound counterproductive, but at least you will have a chance of building an audience. I believe that.
Stephen, my last question might be very irritating for you, but I do have to ask this question. I mean, I ask this question on behalf of many people, and you know this question. What about Porcupine Tree?
What about it?
Will you be back?
No.
Is it a fundamental no?
Let me try and give you a more reasoned explanation. No.
And you ask this question. I mean, I ask this question on behalf of many people, and you know this question. What about Porcupine Tree?
What about it?
Will you be back?
No.
Is it a fundamental no?
Let me try and give you a more reasoned explanation. I'm not interested in going backwards. I'm only interested in going forwards. Why would I go back and do something I've already done? The second thing is, Porcupine Tree started as a solo project. The first 3 albums were solo albums. If I had the confidence at that time to make records under my own name, I probably would have done, but I didn't. I felt like I had to hide behind a band identity. Later on, of course, it became a real band, and I gave more and more control away, if you like, for want of a better word, to other people to create something that was a kind of synergy of 4 personalities. And we made another 6 or 7 records, and we toured, and we started to go But to me, in my heart, I was always still a solo artist. I'm not a team player. I never was. Even with Porcupine Tree, I was very irritating to the rest of the guys. guys. Controlled things very firmly. I wrote most of the material. I found it hard to give away the vision that I had.
I know very precise people who will hate you when you do this.
And I gave, well, I'm sorry, but that's, and I got to the point where I felt like if I was going to continue to evolve as a musician, I had to go back a solo artist, as I believe I was always intended to be. Now, I know people have a very romantic notion about, not just Porcupine Tree, people have a very romantic notion about bands. Something very romantic about bands, but I think a lot of it is illusion. If Porcupine Tree had carried on, the material I got from the solo records would have been the same material I would have brought to that band. Okay, they would have sounded a bit different because the other guys would have put their personality on it. But the trajectory of music, I believe, would have been the same. Because Porcupine Tree was always a product of where I was musically. I got into metal, so the band became a bit more metal. I got into soul, so the band became a bit more soul. I got bored with metal, and I think a lot of people think that that was something to do with me going into my solo career. It wasn't. If Porcupine Tree had carried on, the metal would have gone from that too, because I just lost interest. I felt as part of the musical vocabulary it had gone as far as it could. The last album we made wasn't as good as the ones before, arguably. I'm sure there are people that like it. I felt we were beginning to repeat ourselves. The moment I felt we were beginning to repeat ourselves, that for me was like time. Stop, move on. Life's too short, keep moving forwards. I'm not a very nostalgic person. I don't have very much nostalgia for it. Listen, the records are there. I'm very proud of those records, most of them. Very proud of most of those records. They're still there. They're part of my back catalogue. They're part of my history. The name Porcupine Tree is just a name.
Okay, thank you so much for accepting this invitation. It's been
My
a privilege
pleasure.
to have you here. Thank you for your music and good luck with all that you do.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed this very much.
Tuturor celor care sunt alături de Garantat 100%, mulțumim frumos pentru încredere. Ne vedem data viitoare. Noapte bună!
And your dream